Detroit Lions will rise.
All right, it is that season. It is that season to start selling some headlines, right? No, I'm just kidding. But that's what Brad Holmes says. You know, we're in the business of selling headlines. Hell no, we're not. I'm just kidding. Brad Holmes doesn't want to sell headlines. He wants to win football games. He could care less about April and May. He only cares about January and February and winning the big games. But this is an episode about free agency fits. And Trey Hendrickson obviously is a perfect fit for Detroit because of who he is as a football player and who he is as a individual off the field. We're going to jump into this episode. We're going to break down Trey Hendrickson and why it makes sense to put him in the Honolulu Blue, or does it? But before we do me a favor, smash the like button. Hurry up and subscribe and catch a ride on the Detroit Lions train. Rockhound Detroitlions, that is, as we're going to be bringing it all 2025. We're here. We're ready to go. And now let's talk about trade scenarios. So all the rage right now, trade scenarios. I mean, it's everywhere. Clickbait, it's everywhere. But that's what the aftermath is after the Super Bowl. And, you know, the Lions, realistically, they could explore some of these trade scenarios. I expect them to explore some of them. But they don't really need to swing for the fences right now. In you know, especially on the open trade market, to secure a high-level pass rusher or a high-level defensive tackle. At least for the defensive line, I don't think they need to swing for the fences. I think that they're going to find some alternative ways to get it done. However, depending on what happens over the next few weeks, right, and what's going to shake out in terms of extensions and how teams are going to be either A, trying to hold on to their current free agents or shedding some of their free agents, that obviously is going to impact the Lions. And it could have some appealing options, or could leave some appealing options for the Lions to consider when the actual NFL free agency begins in March. So there's players like Josh Sweat. I mean, this guy just had an incredible Super Bowl. He's looking like the potential headliner of free agency right now, especially for edge rushers. And then, of course, you've got Chase Young. You've got Marcus Davenport, Malcolm Kuntz, to name a few. Speaking of Davenport, I mean, these are all viable options, right? Got a question for you. Would you be interested in keeping Marcus Davenport as a Lions fan? As depth on the cheap, like a 1-year cheap, you know, you prove it contract? I would love to know in the comments below. What do you really think about Davenport? Because I don't think there's any denying the fact that he was playing well. And of course, there's no denying the fact that he was intentionally injured. And I think that when you look at, you know, him as a depth piece with Aiden, with Zadarius Smith, assuming that we keep all these guys, and Josh Paschal, I mean, you really only have room to add one more person, and that is either free agency or draft. And most likely it's coming out of the draft. I guarantee a defensive end's coming out of the draft. So let me know about Marcus Davenport. On the cheap, good depth, come back in 2025. Now, let's talk about Trey. Now, this is a trade that would likely cost a first-round pick. And that's usually under normal circumstances, especially for somebody of his caliber. But there's been some reports circling, right, and speculating that his value may not be a first-round pick. Matter of fact, it may be more of the value of the Brian Burns trade that happened between the Giants last season. Now, that was a second and a fifth, and a swap of fifths, I believe, is the trade. Now, with Trey, I think it's more so netting a second and probably a fourth, and maybe even a sweetener with a sixth. I don't think it's any swappage going on here. I think it's going to be a better draft pick in the later rounds. I think it's going to be an early second-round draft pick, not a late second-round draft pick. And you know, he's entering his final contract, or his final year of his contract, I should say, and he wants a new deal. And that's why this may not involve a first-round pick. So if that's the case, does it make sense for the Lions to do it? Now, early reports are suggesting that, you know, Trey wants a contract. He wants a new deal, and he wants it, you know, before the 2025 season begins. It's been speculated, and Spotrac even backed it up, that his initial contract for an extension is somewhere between, a 60 to 65 million over 2 seasons. I'm thinking he's probably going to get between 80 and 83 over 3 seasons. I think that's what Trey's probably going to pull down. Somewhere between 27 and 32 million APY. I think that's the number for Trey, and he absolutely deserves it. Matter of fact, let me know in the comments below, how much would you pay for Trey Hendrickson? Would you pay a second and a fifth? Would you pay a second and a fourth? Would you pay a first and a third? How much would you pay him in a contract, and how much draft capital would you give up to bring Trey Hendrickson in? I can tell you, for me, if it was a second round anything, I'm in. If it's a first round, I'm probably out, especially looking at the contract and what that's going to do to your cap status. You're going to be very limited on who else you're going to be able to sign, extend, and bring in, especially your own players. You know, you're going to have a tough time trying to sign your own players. So again, let me know in the comments below, how much would you give up for Trey Hendrickson? But while you're thinking of that, let me remind you of his success, because it's pretty incredible. Third most sacks with 70.5 since 2020. How about 2024 sack title with 17.5? How about first team All-Pro in 2024? How about a 4-time Pro Bowler? How about 57 sacks, 11 forced fumbles, and 53 tackles for loss with 112 quarterback hits in just 4 seasons. Four seasons. He is also the only player in the NFL with at least 8 sacks and multiple forced fumbles in each of the past 4 seasons. The only player. Now, look, there's a few things to understand about Trey Hendrickson and what that trade would kind of look like. Now, for starters, the Bengals have not indicated at all that they are willing to move on from him. Matter of fact, I think that they said the exact opposite. And even though their salary cap situation is a bit muddied right now, it could force their hand, especially if Hendrickson wants to sign this new extension before the season begins. I mean, the Bengals just may be up against too much with this. Kind of like the Myles Garrett thing, right? I mean, he's kind of forcing the Browns' hand. He's actually doing the Browns a huge favor. But for Trey, we'll see. We'll see what Cincy does. But the bigger issue, at least for me and the Lions, right, at least our team, is that the Packers are hot on the trail of Hendrickson right now. Now, per some team sources and some other sources that I've spoken to, the Packers are the ones that are chasing Hendrickson hard. The Packers also sit at number 23 in the first round, so they have a perfect draft pick if they want to give up a first. Since it's a little bit later in the first, it's not too early and it's not at the end, which does give them an opportunity. It also gives them an opportunity to kind of jump up in the draft if they wanted to forego Trey Hendrickson and then find some top tier talent. There's plenty of players in the top of this draft. You've got Shamar Stewart, you've got Jack Sawyer, Michael Williams, James Pierce. Who am I forgetting? There's a few others. I'm forgetting a few others, but there's some really good talent in the top of this draft. It's also, from my perspective, a very deep draft for edge, linebacker, and DT. And by deep, I mean, I'm talking the meat. I think that the meat of this draft for some really high quality players is between 25 and 40, maybe even 45. You're going to find some really high quality players that are going to come in and start and be able to affect your defense. Now, for either team, Lions, Packers, whatever, I think that navigating Hendrickson's desire for this contract, that's the biggest hurdle, right? That's the biggest hurdle that we have to jump. Now, Hendrickson is set to make just under $16 million this year in base salary, and that sits outside the top 10 for top 10 edge rushers. And I think that we could all agree Trey Hendrickson deserves to be amongst one of the highest paid defensive ends. He's earned it. I mean, he's killed it since he's been in the league. He's done a phenomenal job, especially after notching 17.5 sacks in back-to-back seasons. You know how hard that is to do? And he did it. Now, he has every right to want to cash in, right? He has every right to want to get paid and increase his earnings and set his family up and family of family and family of family down the line, you know, for generations. Even if that means moving on in the NFL and finding a different team in 2025 and maybe playing for a different contender. Trey addressed his future. And this was one of the first times that he did this offseason. Matter of fact, it was during Super Bowl week, Radio Row. He was on Pat McAfee show, made an appearance, and he said that he would ideally like to remain in Cincinnati. However, the door is open for negotiation. It's open to be traded elsewhere. And he was kind of a bit upset with the Bengals GM. I think it's Duke Tobin. And he made a comment without reaching out to Trey directly. Tobin acknowledged that Trey deserved a contract. Tobin acknowledged that this extension, should get paid to Trey. But the problem is, or at least what he kind of alluded to, is that Trey isn't really partaking in any conversation right now, and said that, quote, "It takes two to tango," end quote. So that wouldn't sit well with me either. If I was Trey, someone calling me out saying that I'm the problem. But here's another quote by Duke Tobin where he said, has he earned a pay raise and a bump in an extension? He has. We're cognizant of that, and we'll give that to him. But whether we agree on what that looks like or what it is to be determined later, Tobin said. We can have guys at the top of the payroll. We can't have guys at the top of the payroll in every position. We'll do what we can. We'll do what we feel is right, and we will try to get Trey re-signed. It's not giving anybody an extension. It's agreeing with somebody on an extension, end quote. And look, it's a good statement. I understand what he's saying here. He's saying that they have to agree, right? They have to be able to play ball together. But Trey hinted that there's poor communication between himself and the front office. He's not happy about it. Matter of fact, he had this quote. He said, "I would have preferred to have heard it differently than my dad texting me." Essentially what he's saying is that Tobin backdoored him, and that he wishes that he would have reached out to him directly about any of these things or making any of these statements on his behalf. But this is exactly how you push a top 10, top 5 edge rusher in the league out of Cincy. Now, he also said this, though, Hendrickson. He said he wants to win a Super Bowl in Cincinnati, but he didn't mince words when he said, even if it means getting traded and going elsewhere and helping them with picks. So he's open to being traded. He's open to helping Cincinnati, whether he's there or whether he's not. Look, for him, when he said this, I want to help win a Super Bowl for Cincinnati if I'm here or there or not. To me, that translates into pay me or trade me. Just don't leave me in limbo all season long. So, look, I would love to see a guy like Trey Hendrickson. We know his body of work. I think that he is Aiden Hutchinson times 2. And I think that he's, a mirror image of Aiden's ability. And I think that they would both do well together, especially if we were able to keep Z and bring back Davenport and have Josh Paschal. That would be an insanely amazing defensive end system that we would have in place. So you let me know in the comments. Are you willing to go all in on Trey Hendrickson? Are you willing to go all in on Myles Garrett? Are you willing to give up the future of this team? Let me know. And thank you for watching and tuning in. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You are the best part of Rockhound Detroit Lions. You always have been. And we'll see you in the next one.
Rockhound Detroit Lions will